do the
Chalo,
boulevards and go back.
chalo,
इसीलिए
start.
remember that language formed in the infant as bodily movements, that the 2-year-old moved his or her hand as she or he said the word, that the 4-year-old employed language as a coordinate of bodily movements. The word hot formed as a part of the general brain pattern for fire, which also included the physical recoil response when needed. In concrete operations, this word thing unity still played the major role in the conceptual work of the brain hologram relating with the earth hologram. Through the logic of differentiation, a word begins to be abstracted from this unity and stand alone as a discrete unit of thought. A word then stands for or represents a thing or event. Then thinking inside the head, as opposed to thinking as action, is possible.
This
A
is
logic
important. This is where the abstractation takes place. Things move from the, it becomes words and all take a meaning of their own. They take a life of their own, and an understanding of that starts to happen. One
Through the
second.
logic of
Yeah.
differentiation, a word begins to be abstracted from this unity and stand alone as a discrete unit of thought. A word then stands for or represents a thing or event. Then thinking inside the head, as opposed to thinking as action, is possible. A logic of words independent of any physical reality can then develop, and this is the propositional language of the adult. Another aspect of the formal operations that open around age 11. That is why literacy is so easily introduced to the 11-year-old. At this point, it does not create premature autonomy and abandonment. At age 11, the young mind still needs examples and guidance in order to build a sufficient body of pure abstractions. Suggestibility is at its peak at this period. At age 7, the child's suggestions for possibility needed to be given in concrete form, directly in front of him or her, or by specific concrete instruction and suggestion. His or her capacity for imitative play then moved his or her body accordingly, and the new abstract concepts were formed out of this concrete action. At 11, suggestions can be given without direct modeling or concrete referent. The 11-year-old Japanese, Juni, simply heard a new cast about children repeating Jeller's exploits. Juni immediately knew he could do so and did. John Taylor found that older children and teenagers could imitate only after hearing of some possibility. They had a sufficient ability to create abstractions, not based on concreteness. The nature of abstractions given the 11-year-old must have a sufficient number of points of similarity with his or her existing abstract knowledge to be assimilated and a sufficient number of points of dissimilarity to bring about accommodations and new conceptual ability. Following that brain growth spurt, the 11 or 12-year-old has a passion for learning, a passion for ideas, a universal longing to understand. I remember the long late night talks my buddies and I had at that stage, as we slept over at each other's houses or out under the stars, rolled up in old army blankets. We understood more than adults had any idea of, and we longed to know and comprehend everything. We were filled with long, serious thoughts, engrossed in thinking about thinking. At 12 and 13, we ranged over universal issues, the vastness of space and time, the overwhelming problem of God, the meaning of existence. There were few limits to our journeying into thought along whatever skimpy lines opened for us. None of our longings were met by schooling. We found few points of correspondence between our vast hunger and the strange, harsh, fair-fed us at that board. Somewhere before maturity, however, our anxieties drove us to accept the alien point of view we were schooled in, and our longings were lost in the mad push for identity that filled our next decades, a push that lost us the world and all its offerings. The parents of the magical child know that the periods of intensive learning ushered in by brain growth spurts do not last. They are aware of the cycle of competence to be followed at each new stage. New learning is appropriate for about a year and a half after the growth spurt. This is the period of roughing in the new possibilities and capacities. The only additional learning that occurs during the filling in the details period is that which augments and completes the initial learning. And the parents know that in the final third or so of the cycle, when practice and variation are called for, no new learnings are appropriate. During this period, they largely leave their child alone, interceding only as his or her practice and variation need specific help. They know that a slow, steady, progressive accumulation of knowledge, which unfortunately is believed by educators to be possible, is, in fact, not possible and specifically damaging if attempted. They take their cues from their child and respond accordingly. They know that their child is biologically geared for learning and will do so automatically and joyfully when the content offered meshes with his or her intent and its needs. They know that the child is driven from within to learn and that attempts at exterior motivation can induce only anxiety conditioned reactions, not learning. They know their child is genetically programmed to be led and guided. They know that the child's play on the surface and conceptual work beneath are moving into closer synchrony, leading towards the point when she or he will be able to play freely with an infinite potential. The meshing of play and conceptual work is the whole thrust and meaning of development and the way by which we move from concreteness to abstraction. Earlier we saw how the early child's play remained distinct from the conceptual construction of his or her worldview. At age 7, when individuation begins to function, play can, if trained or guided, begin to mesh with concepts as noted in the Geller children. This capacity may be directly tied with individuation and fading egocentricity. The Eskimo value system, according to Jerome Bruner, stresses self-reliance but strongly suppresses any expression of individualism as an attitude towards life. This self-reliance depends on an unbroken relationship and rapport with the flow of nature. Thus, the Eskimo retains his primary perceptions and perceives interrelations and intricacies of his physical environment, including an airplane engine. Physical reality is reality to one in tune with the earth. But this is a one-way passive reception for the Eskimo. Without some final separation of self from world, objectivity is blocked and understanding does not follow knowing. He flows with the movement of life, but cannot stand outside his action and comprehend creating movement out of that flow. Once concrete operational functions have given full ability to interact with the physical processes, our intelligence should be free for formal operations, such as turning around, observing our concrete interactions, and retracing our steps to see how we did it. Then we can correlate that ability with other activity and apply it over a wide range. This is what we sometimes accomplish with our schooling, and this is what the Eskimo or Balinese fail to do, perhaps because they never fully separate from the world process as individuals. Their development is arrested somewhere in a mixture of practical intelligence as developed in the first 7 years and certain restricted form of concrete operational intelligence. Ordinarily, it is the opposite with us. We bring about a premature separation between self and world, lose our unity before physical survival can develop, and plunge into a fixed cultural form of formal operational thinking, the semantic reality system based on anxiety over survival. Add to this the loss, through neglect or negative feedback, of primary perceptions and bonds with the earth, and our dependency on our semantic system is doubled. In a way, we in our culture skip crucial developments from age 4 or 5 and leap ahead to restricted concretized forms of formal operations opening around 11 or so. We say the non-literates do not develop true individuality, but what we experience as individuality is alienation from an abandonment of the life process. Literate and non-literate cultures represent extremes of imbalance, failures to achieve creative interaction. In spite of our imbalances, our culture is the one holding the promise for the magical child, because we can, as a result of our separation, stand back and look objectively, even at our own extreme isolation. We can retrace our steps as Geber, Ainsworth, Liboyer, Claus, and a host of others are helping us do, and see what needs to be filled in so that our development might lead not to isolation and alienation from our earth, but to creative relationships. We have the capacity to learn from the pre-literate or so-called primitive culture and pick up vital qualities missing in our own without having to abandon our objectivity. In spite of institutional strangleholds on thought, we maintain avenues of open inquiry and may yet achieve a balance between nature and nurture. Consider suggestology, a learning procedure developed in Bulgaria and given some rather sensational attention that detracted from its actual worth. The system has been employed in Canada and at Pepperdine College in Los Angeles, but not, so far as I know, with children here. Adult students are guided in relaxation techniques and a kind of childlike play. This is accompanied by quiet incidental music. When the inhibitions to the relaxed play have been sufficiently broken down, a subject, generally a foreign language, is quietly broadcast along with the musical background while the students concentrate only on their play. Within weeks, the students have a grasp and fluency in the language or subject. What the procedure does is occupy the conscious, volitional self, so conditioned to be anxious and concerned over learning, in relaxed, non-purposive play. This gets the anxious, tightly screening volitional self out of the way, freeing the vast computational abilities of the brain. The participants know a learning process is underway, but they are not called upon to work at learning, nor are they tested in any ordinary sense. They are eventually drawn into some application of their learning in a casual manner and find that the material is at their disposal. Consider this activity from the standpoint of the learning system proposed in the earlier chapters of this book. Play on the surface and work beneath that surface. In suggestology, the conscious volitional system is gotten out of the way of the work beneath by involving the person in a game activity. Within weeks, a new subject is mastered without conscious work. The limitless capacity of the mind-brain for absorption and computation of new material is freed of the encumbrances of a self-system conditioned to believe that it must do the work of the non-conscious conceptual system. Now consider this idea from a slightly different perspective. The maturing of intelligence should be the gradual merging and interaction between the conscious self playing on the surface and the conceptual system working beneath that surface. Colin Turnbull, in his observations of a hunting-gathering people of Africa, found that the adults play continually with the infants and children, and the children play continually in the adult world. The adults make miniature utensils for the children, bows and arrows, cooking items, household gadgets, such as they are, and play with the children at using them. And it is true play, the adults delighting in the child's delight at the mutual interaction. Somewhere along the line, the child moves smoothly and easily into more adult roles. The items of play grow more functional until finally the young person is playing alongside the adults. Never at any point is there a break in this progression, a point at which play becomes real. It is all real and all play. We could do the same with a far greater range of mind and possibility if no split between work and play is arbitrarily formed. That is, if the child were allowed to play and the work allowed to unfold properly, the parallel lines of work and play would essentially merge by adulthood. In suggestology, some hint of this power is found, but something is amiss. Why should the volitional self be a hindrance to learning? Why should we have to trick our self system into getting out of the way so that the conceptual system can function? Does this not still divide the system? And is there not a strong possibility that far from profound levels of learning would be in store for us if the self system would be in synchronous flow with the conceptual system? In spite of protestations by suggestologists that the technique has no similarity to hypnotism, there is a similarity. The student has, in effect, surrendered his volition to the experiment and the people running the venture. The student's system is divided, with ordinary consciousness not participating in the learning. This is necessary because that ordinary consciousness is locked in anxiety about learning, fear of failure, of not learning, and so on. Can we not look beyond the surface rewards of the process, though, and see a far richer reward? If the non-personal conceptual system can learn so fast and thoroughly, would be the possibilities for the whole mind if conscious volition and the inner work were in harmony? That is what nature drives for and what should unfold in late pre-adolescence and adolescence. Then every event in life, every unfolding moment would be learning and eventually the creativity that such learning would give.
Anything,
Journey,
anyone? I think it's pretty clear.
Yeah, it's very clear.
Yeah, okay.
journey into the mind, creative reality. Occasionally, as I sit at my work, poring over research papers heavy with professional jargon, I lean back, heavy lidded, to relax for a moment. Suddenly, I am looking into a large, elaborately furnished, stately room in full dimensions. As in a slow motion film sequence, the strange room slides past and another takes its place, then another. As easily as the imagery started, it fades and I am again poring over a research report. Less than a minute has elapsed and I feel refreshed and oddly tranquil. A friend of mine, a successful businessman, leans back in his office chair for 5 minutes of a total relaxation developed over the years. Suddenly, he seems to do a slow roll and finds himself apparently free of his physical body and moving, or rather floating, into unknown and rather alien territory. Involved in the ensuing events, he loses track of time, suddenly remembers an appointment, wills himself back to normal, glances at his watch, and finds that the usual 5 minutes have elapsed. The great 19th century scientist Kekule had long pondered certain problems of chemistry. One day, in a moment of complete relaxation,
So, one second here. So, basically, he is going out of body, okay? And in out of body state, you can learn a lot. Time ceases to exist as it exists normally.
one day, in a moment of complete relaxation, he suddenly saw clearly, right in front of him, snakes with their tails in their mouths, interlocking in a certain configuration. Kekule had the answer to his years of research. The benzene ring, the basis of modern chemistry, had been born.
So, again, he got the information not directly from his own volition, but he got it as a download when he went into an altered state of consciousness. So, someone was asking, what's the use of an OBE? So, now these are uses of the OBE.
Albert Einstein, in his playful musings on reality, he idolized Charlie Chaplin and longed to be a great comic actor, would feel a sudden muscular twinge, an internal visceral sensation that signaled into an illumination some vast universal principle. It then took some time for the necessary translation of this bodily impression into linguistic form. A young man and woman I know who attend a college in California have learned to control their night dreaming well enough to enter into each other's dreams and share them. Their independent reports, written the next morning, invariably tally.
Okay, so someone was asking yesterday whether you can go out of body and meet over there. So I had said that yes, that can happen. This is the same thing. They are having a shared experience.
This is something like Inception also, isn't it?
Are you replying?
No, okay.
These are only a few of the myriad tales of experience available through formal operational thinking. The necessary preliminaries for such ability begin at about age 11. At about age 15, the brain goes into another of its periodic cycles with a new burst of growth and another shift of logic into full reversibility, thinking, and pure abstract logical ability. At the same time, with genital sexuality unfolding, the body moves towards full stature. From ages 11 to 15, concrete operations have been practiced and increasingly varied, while abstract learning has given greater abilities for thinking about thinking. Now, at 15 or so, with the techniques of physical survival learned and nearly autonomic, a two-pronged drive opens: genital sexuality, leading to species survival, and the journey into the mind, which leads to eventual personal survival. Through formal operational thinking, the mind-brain can operate on its own thought processes, act back on its own functions, and change them. We are all familiar with certain concrete forms of this kind of thinking, as found in science, technology, and ordinary academic pursuits. But the creative capacity of the mind-brain ranges infinitely beyond any current use. It can synthesize its contents and create an ever large expanse of possibility. All possible states are equal valid to this open process. Any evaluations are up to us. What we must bear in mind is that any perception we experience is the result of conceptual activity in the brain, whether that perception is of the living earth or of a benzene ring in the form of snakes. The brain can act on sensory information coming in from the world, or it can act on the sensory system and furnish perceptions originating completely within itself. Formal operational thinking can certainly act on and synthesize new ideas out of the cultural body of ideas, but it can also be a conceptual activity springing autonomously from those infinitely interacting patterns of rhythmic firing that almost never cease in the brain. Furthermore, as we found with the child's primary perceptions, those rhythmic patterns can also respond to stimuli from the primary process within the mind brain and give equally valid perceptions. It is all reality to the experiencing mind, just as play reality and adult reality are equally real and equally arbitrary to the child. We have been conditioned to believe that only creative thoughts
This becomes, Shivangla, 1 second. This becomes important because what it's saying over here is that if we are physically doing something, or if we are just mentally thinking of doing something, the reactions in the body are the same. Okay.
We have been conditioned to believe that only creative thoughts arising from and contributing to our culture's art and sciences are valid, just as we have been conditioned to believe that only perceptions arising from physical sensory stimuli are valid. Yet, one of our strongest emotional psychological needs is for the brain to give expression to its own creative capacity. We believe that a perceptual experience must be subject to consensual evaluation to be genuine, which means the source of the stimulus must be in physical reality. else it must be a hallucination and a threat to our orientation. This distrust of the brain's creativity and its ability to furnish spontaneous sensory perceptions sharply reduces the range of our intelligence and is one of the reasons why we use only a portion of our brain capacity. The mind can eventually turn to its own brain processes, stand outside those computations, and operate on them to change them and so change the resulting information. That continual refinement can eventually separate thinker from thinking so that the thinker can create ideas out of ideas and create imaginative patterns for concrete operations that earlier had to have models for suggestion. Then the mind brain can represent some aspect of reality metaphorically and amass critical groups of related ideas. This action between volitional choice and primary process is how we arrive at any kind of answer, intellectual, scientific, creative, or spiritual. The great thrust of modern man has been to question how he received his answers. We desire to know how our solutions are achieved, and this involves full reversibility thinking in its academic sense, the ability not only to achieve a solution, but also to retrace our steps in creating that solution. All creativity is an expression of reversibility thinking. Historically, we have assumed that the only continuum of possibility is one generated by the physical world around us. For otherwise, how can possibilities be developed and shared with others? But this has led to human creativity being limited to mediated forms. That is, creativity has been expressed only through some material means of transference from one mind brain to another. Immediately, in fact, we wonder how there can be any other kind of creativity. The word itself causes trouble. When we think of a creative child, we tend to think of crayon and paper, daubs of clay, perhaps a flute and an overall indulgence. When we think of an intellectual child, we think of mathematics, books, chemistry sets, and practical, real things. Both are obviously areas of creativity, expressions of the ability to interact with possibilities. In fantasy play, the child sees a truck or boat in the matchbox and chooses his or her possibility from a continuum in the same way Michelangelo saw the finished statue in the rough stone.
I think you missed a page.
I did, sorry. No.
Achha, okay.
You've probably gone another.
Sorry.
In fantasy play, the child sees a truck or boat in the matchbox and chooses his or her possibility from a continuum in the same way Michelangelo saw the finished statue in the rough stone. The child transforms the real matchbox into his or her play reality, boat, and enters into that reality. Michelangelo transformed the stone itself into an imagined picture of it. The child's transformed reality has no consensus value. She or he experiences his or her creation alone. Michelangelo's transformation is available on a consensual level, and we enjoy it for centuries. What the child transforms is unchanged. The return is to the unchanged point of origin. The stone is never again the same once Michelangelo uses the medium of tools to express his creativity through the medium of the stone. The statue is an aspect of the earth plus the human mind expressing itself through a physical tool. Thus, it is a form of abstraction out of concreteness, or concrete operational thinking, whereas the child's fantasy reality is an aspect of the earth plus mind without any intermediary devices. Science and its technology and all art must be expressed through concrete mediums. Even mathematics and music, which are closest to pure abstractions, must be expressed through the medium of symbols or signs if they are to be communicated. There are mathematical geniuses who can do great computation in their heads, but they never must revert to some kind of medium to express themselves to others. Mozart conceived his works in Gestalt form, experiencing them as complete units. His labor came in translating that inner perfection into the digital linear signs other musicians could interpret, and so give the music life. An art form is a medium of expression, and the medium determines the art. The wonder of the human mind is that such mediums of translation can be invented and that such wide uses of these inventions then evolve. The great difference between Western and Eastern music rests on the West's invention of musical notation. The medium of idea transference created wide new dimensions for musical creativity itself, just as mathematical symbols added vast dimensions beyond counting on toes and fingers. The printing press created the Gutenberg galaxy, the medium becomes the message, and so on. Consider, though, that the maturation of intelligence is programmed to move from concreteness towards great abstractions or pure thought. No matter how pure, formal, and abstract our formal operational thought becomes, even our purest scientific research, we must express it through some form of concreteness, some medium of translation and transference. That is, all art and science is an expression of mature thought that must nevertheless use intermediary materials. We might say that the stage of development opening at adolescence seems always to have to be expressed through the stage opening at age 7. All our creativity then has so far been a combination of formal and concrete thinking. And this is surely one of the great combinational forms available to us. But with due respect, awe and wonder for this kind of creation, I would point out that it is limited, nevertheless, to the concreteness of its medium. The mature intelligence should be able to interact with the possibilities of the living earth, that living earth plus the creativity of the mind, and the processes and products of the mind brain itself. So far, we have used this third category of possibility only in relation to the second category. That is, the mind brain has not become its own matrix as planned genetically for the period of late adolescence and maturity. Any artist will tell you that the medium of the art is the hurdle that must be overcome in order for creativity to unfold. The pianist performing 800 individual strokes per minute must get beyond the notes to break. Surely, the same applies to all art forms and even the sciences. The issue is that great creative thought can arise only from the proper concrete background. The progression is never violated. What then would be a truly mature form of creativity? It would be one of pure abstractions that did not require concrete forms of expression. Although this pure development could take place only through the disciplined learning of tangible material forms, such unmediated creativity would be the highest thrust of human intelligence. The medium of transfer for this formal, abstract act of creation would be, and is, the primary process. Being the common factor of every mind brain, the primary process can be the medium for expression of pure creation. The creative formation itself is also of the primary process, and the creative receptors are the individual expressions of that process, you and me. One of us can create a pure abstraction in his or her head, and through the primary process which participates in that creation, can share the resulting perceptions with someone else. And that is one aspect of the mind brain becoming its own matrix. Unmediated creativity is quite common. Ordinary dreams are a form of unmediated creation. Unstable and crude as the perceptions generally are, we are still perceiving in dreams, and this means conceptual activity in the brain. The undisciplined and chaotic nature of such experience is probably the fault, not of the function, but of its lack of education and organizing. In lucid dreams, we get closer to a reversible type of controlled perceptions, we suddenly recognize that we are dreaming and find that we can maintain some control and a kind of ordinary consciousness in them. We are at that point standing outside brain computations and directing their flow. The brain churns in continuous activity with apparently more noise than signals. That is, much brain action is unproductive. This is particularly true of daydreaming and roof brain chatter. In fact, we spend most of our waking state in this unreal energy attention and attend the mechanics of existence only peripherally. Thus, the magical thinking of the child carries over into adulthood. But whereas the child believes his or her magical thinking to be the truth and anticipates coming into his or her powers to implement it, we adults recognize our daydream and internal chatter to be only safety valves of fulfillment that make reality more bearable. We are geared not for tedium but for novelty. The infant grows through novelty and likes complex patterns better than plain ones. We quickly screen out the humdrum and look for something different. Repetitiveness is dull. Generally, our escape is through daydreaming and internal conversations. The creativity of the mind-brain has many other possibilities as well. But although we look for novelty, we look for it in restricted, safe, and rather non-novel ways. The hypnagogic state is an example of our creative possibilities, but we are the recipients of this creative action. My only control or part in the state is to remain absolutely passive and receptive. This experience takes place at some halfway point between sleep and wakefulness. It bears some resemblance to lucid dreaming in its utter visual and often oral clarity and spatial characteristics. At moments of awakening from a brief nap while working or early in the morning, when I am sitting quietly, my mind pauses at some house halfway to common reality, and I receive quite lovely gifts. I call them gifts because I have nothing to do about them other than receiving them. When consciousness returns, but the sensory system remains shut down for a brief moment or so, other kinds of perceptions pour in as my creativity leaps into temporary void, delighted with the chance to play with me. One morning, for instance, I was up at 2 a.m. A field mouse had decided to take up quarters with me and began busily gnawing new runway entrances and exits. I don't know why. There must have been several hundred perfectly good ones all over the cabin. He made such an infernal din, in spite of my pounding, pleading, and threatening, that I finally gave up, dressed, lit the lamp, and started working on this chapter. About dawn, I grew drowsy and blew out the lamp. As I watched the light grow stronger, my eyes rested on my large brick fireplace, and as it turned out, I suppose I then closed my eyes. Immediately without transition, I was still looking at bricks, still in apparent 3 dimension. But I became aware of an enormous sweep of brick wall, not a building's wall, but a huge interior wall with niches and ornamentations. The whole sweep had an exciting threshold of discovery feeling, and I realized that I had swung into a hypnagogic state triggered by the bricks of my fireplace. At that point of self-conscious awareness, the scene faded to my disappointment, since some enormous discovery had seemed imminent, and I found myself staring at my own fireplace. The usual post-hypnagogic feelings of peace, security, warmth, luxuriousness, power, and confidence flooded me, and I forgot my disappointment over the brevity of the incidents. For a period of a year or more, most of my hypnagogic experiences centered on rooms. At night, on going to bed, or early on first awakening or catnapping, I would suddenly find myself observing rooms again without apparent transition from ordinary wakefulness. Whole series of extraordinary rooms would simply file by in 3 dimensions. room of every conceivable form. Sometimes they flowed in stately procession, at other times faster and faster, until I no more than glimpsed each as a whizzing blur. Sometimes the sequences of rooms unfolded vertically from bottom up, but most of the time they moved from left to right. Generally, I could view the rooms only as though from one side, but on a few memorable occasions, I managed to stop the flow and enter them. At that point, the experience seemed to blend into lucid dreaming. Once and only once, I met occupants of a room that way and had a truly hilarious time with them. They were not exactly human characters, but quite dreamlike. They agreed with me that I was dreaming them, but said it made no difference because they were also dreaming me, which struck us all as funny beyond words, and we roared with laughter. Then I could hold the room no longer and felt myself melting through the floor. The sequence had been unfolding vertically. We shouted our goodbyes and they made me promise to come back. Alas, such control is not mine. I came out of the state still laughing. The esoteric and occult schools which claim I had been traveling around, but I doubt this is the case. I was simply being given perceptions to enjoy by my creative primary process, which had an infinite amount of this sort of play rather going to waste. A year or so ago, I had the most impressive of hypnagogic experiences. Early one morning, I awoke and arose immediately. I do not enjoy lying in bed after I awake. Others of my family were up and I heard kitchen rattling and banging. Immediately, though, I had an overpowering urge to lie down and close my eyes, which I did, recognizing the onset of a hypnagogic experience. My senses remained at least partially alert throughout the adventure, which was quite unusual, and at one point someone came in saying that they had thought I was up. I replied with such an explosive shh that they immediately desisted and the state went unbroken, which was even more unusual because the hypnagogic state is as fragile as a soap bubble. Immediately after closing my eyes, I thought a brilliant light must have been turned on my closed lids, for I saw a great red field, as though brilliant red velvet, that was three-dimensional and had a vast depth extending to cover the whole universal field. This red velvet universe was exquisitely beautiful for some reason, with heavy luminous overtones. That is, it was tinged with religious awe and wonder. Just as I was coming to grips with the astonishing dimensions and qualities of this experience, fragile horizontal gold lines appeared in neat symmetrical patterns in the immediate foreground. The effect of the brilliant gold lines against the red was stunning, and I all but wept at the sight. Then, in neat and slow procession, vertical gold lines appeared behind the horizontal in perfect parallel precision, and behind these another set of horizontals, and so on, until the universal field seemed to be a magnificent grid of gold against red, giving the panorama great sweep and depth. By then, I had the feeling of being in deep space that hypnagogic imagery often gives. Finally, as though simply to demonstrate in casual beauty and powers of creation being tendered me, appeared a luminous green sphere of light on which each gold line, the gold line directly through its center, each globe an unearthly iridescent green. Then began a slow and stately movement along its respective goal lines, stretching away through the universe of red. When it faded, I shouted aloud, "No, no, of course, I wanted to stay there forever. It was nice, better than TV." For weeks afterward, the effect lingered within me, the warm luxury of unity and power, mixed with a strange longing for homesickness. I had been given a gift, and I like to think it has not been wasted. One might wonder if this is not an illusion, hallucination, or delirium. Have I seen my analyst lately? Ah, I reply, if this be madness, let me never regain sanity. And what is such an experience good for? True, the experience seems worthless. I cannot package it and sell it, nor even duplicate it, nor, in case the reader wonders, is it related to drugs. I do not take them. I am given gifts as well as we all are by that great work beneath my surface. All I am asked to do is to receive, to play. Nor are our gifts limited to experiences of a sensory nature of this sort. Many of them coming at night in high cosmic dreams, in prayer, in meditation, or simply of moments of blankness, have no basis in ordinary sensory awareness and so cannot be described. These gifts are ineffable, as they say, and, although the most powerful of all, not even available to recall of content. Creations of the mind brain that could be shared by people is my concern for now. Note that the hypnagogic experiences I have related were perceived by me as clearly as my ordinary daily world, if not far from clearly. When I glanced at those geometric drawings and my body parked friends immediately perceived them, our perceptions were shared through our primary process, that hologram of unified experience. The shared item was a material object, graphite on paper, and yet had nowhere near the depth, clarity, significance, and power of my hypnagogic experience. Theoretically, it must then be biologically and psychologically feasible to share a hypnagogic kind of creativity with another mind. Indeed, there are an array of legitimate experiments along just such a line. Recall, Charles starts two subjects in the telepathic experiment when B was shocked, and A's body knowing clearly stated when the shocks occurred, even though A, as a conscious person, was not aware of the event. Very clearly, A's mind brain picked up from B's experience without any medium of exchange other than the mechanism of mind brain, which includes the medium of the primary process mediating an actual occurrence between two people. The same effect can be brought about when the only point of departure is pure imagination or creativity, originating in one mind brain and picked up and shared by another. And when two mind brain systems share the same created experience, that experience becomes consensual between those two, a common property of the senses of both. In the same way, a semantic cultural reality does among millions of people, an agreement on a common property of shared senses immediately stabilizes the sensory information. For example, Dr. Dart developed a system for mutual hypnosis. Two of his graduate assistants, a young man and a young woman, were very good at giving large-scale tests for hypnotic susceptibility, and they proved to be very good hypnotic subjects themselves. Dart trained the young woman to put the young man under hypnosis and then command the young man to put her under. Dart kept himself in rapport with both to give each the suggestion to further the other's hypnotic depth, and to keep himself as the objective observer ready to intercede if unforeseen problems arose. To be put under the hypnosis, that young man had to surrender his volitional choice system and in effect give it to the young woman. At that point, she became his capacity to choose what his primary process should furnish as his created reality. The young woman then had to suspend her volitional choice system and give it over to the young man to be hypnotized herself. So each had surrendered the choice system to the other, and the choice factors of their brain computers at that point became a kind of mutually shared system. The result was that the techniques they were using to induce deeper hypnosis in the other, back and forth at some critical point, became conceptual reality for them. For instance, the boy was instructing the girl to imagine a tunnel into which they were going down deeper into hypnosis. At that point, he had chosen some specific concrete reality patterning for her conceptual system to organize around, and it complied with quite realistic sensory perceptions of a tunnel for her. She then used the same imagery, now quite vivid for her, to induce further depth to his hypnotic state. And as in our group experiments, when I had looked at geometric drawings and these had transferred to the group, suddenly the boy and girl were together in the tunnel. At the moment, the tunnel imagery was mutually shared and given consensus between them. That tunnel took on full dimensional sensory reality. It smelled, felt, looked, and sounded like a regular tunnel. They could distinguish no difference in the reality of the tunnel and the reality of any ordinary daily event in the actual world. They knew, of course, that the affair was not real. Yet, they finally terminated the experience because the tunnel's realness was as great as any other, and they became anxious to re-establish the real reality of the everyday world. They had chosen and granted validity to a state from a continuum of possible states, entertained that state as reality, but then felt the need to return to the point from which the operation of mind began. Since the details of the tunnel were shared and identical, they began conversing with each other in that created state, rather than using their actual voices there in their ordinary reality, where Tart was trying to remain in rapport with them. He continually got left out. Another graduate assistant came in, however, sat down, and being an excellent subject, quickly fell into hypnosis. She found herself in the pair's tunnel. They sensed her presence and resented it. The tunnel was, after all, their thing. She sensed their resentment and retreated to a far part of the tunnel where she watched unobserved. On another occasion, the pair used the metaphor of a golden rope up which they were climbing to reach deeper states of hypnosis. The girl found the rope hard to climb and switched to a golden rope ladder. Suddenly, the pair found themselves on a magnificent golden beach with a champagne ocean, crystal rocks, heavenly choirs singing overhead. The experience was so unexpected, awesome, and majestic that they held hands to give each other courage. Every item of their created state had stabilized because it was shared. They could taste, touch, smell, and hear as they could in everyday life. The phenomena did not shift, as such things do in a dream. On one occasion, they turned towards each other unexpectedly, occupied the same physical space, at which point their personal identities merged. Each perceived him or herself as their combined personalities. This was unnerving. The boy insisted they leave the state and count down to normal. The young man was so unnerved by the series of experiments that he refused to continue. He could no longer grant himself consensus about what was really real, because the non-ordinary reality that they had mutually created and shared was sensorily the same as his everyday experience. As an unexpected result, to which we will return in chapter 22, was that the boy and girl very quickly developed a puzzling deep affinity for each other. They could not bear being during the weeks of the experiments. Jean Houston, whose Foundation for Mind Research delves into phenomena of this sort, warns against using mixed couples or pairs in mutual hypnosis unless those pairs are prepared for deep emotional involvement. A group of friends and I found that in a deep hypnotic states, one member of the group could begin a hypnotic dream when so directed by the guide, and others would quickly find themselves both experiencing and contributing to that dream. The minute the minute the minute two or more were sharing the dream, it stabilized and became an ordinary consensus reality available to all the senses. These states then seemed permanent. The group could return to them later, as could the individual members of the group. A college student related having lost 3 years to LSD addiction, he and a friend had tripped together regularly until they finally shared all their states. On one occasion, they asked another friend to stay around and watch after them while they tripped. The friend was a poetic, religious, and intellectual person who would not experiment with drugs or alcohol. In proximity to them, however, he got caught up in their created state and tripped right along with them. They were surprised to find their babysitter in their LSD state, and he was equally surprised and delighted. All three partook of the adventure and, on returning to normal, wrote out their accounts. The accounts were the same. Robert Monroe is a successful businessman who made a fortune through television and radio stations. Through a number of chance events he experienced leaving his physical body a number of years ago. This happens to many people once and briefly, but Monroe was adventurous, astute, and brave enough to develop the experience until it became commonplace for him. Exteriorization is the ordinary term for a person having the perception of leaving his body and being a free mind agent, although it may be a misnomer as is out of the body. The esoteric disciplines call it astral travel. Some of Tart's early work at the University of Virginia Medical Hospital involved making electroencephalic tracings of epileptic and severe migraine patients. He found that they often apparently separated from their bodies when in the depths of a seizure. A young professor from Leeds University in England came to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill a number of years ago and found that his students could, under a deep hypnosis, be commanded to leave their bodies in effect and give reports on other professors in their offices about the campus or even on events far away. The students give quite accurate reports, easily verifiable by telephone. The famous psychic Edgar Cayce could do something similar while in deep trance. He called it temporarily inhabiting someone's body. If given a target person's name and address, he could give reportedly accurate accounts of that person's activities. In the 1840s, a Maine shoemaker, Phineas Quimby, could locate missing people this way and reportedly healed people by inhabiting their bodies, assuming the illness for them, and returning to his own healthy body to throw off the illness. Many shamans follow this procedure for healing. Dr. Tag and Puthoff of Stanford Research Institute, both reputable laser scientists and many patents behind them, have recently produced an interesting effect of a similar nature. Subjects, including hitherto non-psychic Stanford professors, sit in a Faraday cage which screens out radio waves or other means for fraud and give, often to their great surprise, accurate reports of unknown target areas being visited by one of the researchers at that moment. The researcher is given a sealed envelope containing the name of the target area to be visited and goes to look around the target area while the subject is in the Faraday cage, relaxes and reports any impressions that arise in his mind. In a majority of cases, these impressions are of the target area. Tag and Puthoff have run some 55 people, including scientists and other professionals, through the system with astonishing results. However, Robert Monroe's experiences are probably
I think
the
we can
most
stop here
intriguing.
now because we won't finish it in any case. We'll read tomorrow also.
12 to 29 है कल का 12 हाँ कल हो जाएगा I guess.
Finish tomorrow.
ये तो 5-7 मिनट और पढ़ना है तो बात अलग है.
nahin, let's close. What? Anyone? Anything to say? We'll have to read this book for one more day, and then it'll get over. The basic premise of the book is basically the matrix system and how a child grows through the matrix system, and that's what's very, very important. And if certain learning, etc., is taking place before the child's conceptualization system is ready to be able to handle it, it can create problems in the growth of the child. Basically, that's what the book is all about. Anyone wants to say anything? No one?
Okay.
Okay, so we meet at 4 o'clock for meditation.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Bye.